Welcome to That's High Praise, a Nicolas Cage podcast.
I'm your host, V.H. Zest.
And I am your other host, Captain Nostalgia. And on this episode, we are talking about It Could Happen to You. Man, this movie...
Kind of a ride. Emotionally, not like, The Rock.
No. Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, sorry. Don't watch this expecting, chases.
This movie is probably the most wholesome movie we've covered in Nicolas Cage's catalog.
Yeah, I think we'd be hard-pressed to find a more wholesome film than that he's done.
And that includes G-Force.
All right, so where do we want to begin? This movie it's fire. It's so good.
Yeah, let's just start general thoughts, man. So
sure, okay.
Let's kind of talk. Let's run through, because this is kind of like one of the hidden gems of his era of his career. How would you describe what this movie is about?
Okay, this is kind of a buddy cop meets rom-com about a really straight-laced cop from Queens who wins the lottery and decides to basically change people's lives with it.
That's putting it very mildly.
Yes, it is.
We'll kind of jump into it a little bit more. The movie co-stars Bridget Fonda and Rosie Perez and a very young Stanley Tucci.
It does not co-star him. He's in the movie in 3 scenes, and you're excited about it.
Gotta throw my man some Tucci some love there. Well, I thought this would be kind of a cool way to open up before we get into the movie discussion.
Sure.
What would you do if you won the lottery?
Yeah, I figured we'd go there. It's. Well, when you win the lottery, I think it's generally a good idea to actually make a point to give some of it away. That way you don't get too screwed on your taxes. If at least for that reason. I don't know. I would. I'd buy a house. Probably first things first. I'd buy a house in cash. I would probably do more than that, but I'd probably pay off my parents' house. I'm pretty sure they are not quite done with that. Yeah. And I'd probably buy this car that a friend of mine is selling that my wife wants. It's a Volvo station wagon. I don't know. What do you want? Something extravagant?
No,
I'm not
because I would go there as well. I would pay off, pay off debts.
Sure. Yeah.
And I'd get a house.
Yeah.
And make sure that I had my movie theater man cave /
for sure,
victims and villains office.
Yeah, no, I would get inset shelving in the basement for all of our VHS tapes.
Ooh, yeah.
I would get probably in-house speakers, not just for movies but also for shows, because I want to book house shows. That's a blast, and I used to do that all the time. I would stuff a good chunk into a money market savings account so that it could accrue more.
That's smart.
Yeah. I had, I don't know, probably buy Bitcoin or something.
Yeah, and my ultimate goal is to have a place in our house, future home, where it's you can just watch a movie on a projector, and then you can just be in the same chair, just swivel around. It's let's podcast about it.
Yeah. Yo, that'd be sick. That'd be so cool. We could do what are those things that people do where they do live commentaries?
Oh, you guys can hear live commentaries that we have done, including
I've not done. I'm sorry.
Justice League. And a couple of SpongeBob episodes for as little as $1 to $5 a month.
That's right, we did do that.
And all of that money goes to put mental health resources into schools. Who doesn't love film commentaries and partnering with mental health organizations like Victims and Villains.
Yeah, and Saturday morning cartoons.
Yeah. Patreon.com/Victims and Villains. Had to throw that out there. Let's continue.
What would you do? I mean, you listed a couple things, but
yeah, no, it's have you ever seen The Italian Job with Mark Wahlberg?
Been a long time. Did you buy a Mini Cooper?
I would. I would buy Mini Cooper, but I was more or less referring to the fact that the Ed Norton character doesn't know what to do with all of his money, so he just steals everyone else's idea. No, I would probably make sure that like I had like good podcasting equipment.
Sure.
Like,
yeah,
I would invest into like turning Victims and Villains into like not just like a part-time operation,
like an
you
LLC,
hear,
actual
like
yeah.
And be able to like actually like pay people, staff and stuff like that. So
very cool.
That's kind of what I would do.
Marketing and PR guy.
I know.
And accountant. I honestly, like, I could do a few things. I wear many hats.
Okay, I'll keep that in line. Are people just like, oh, just like this is a business meeting we came into? It's Nicolas-Cage. This movie's wholesome AF.
Oh my goodness! Like it's more wholesome than the fact that his character in The Rock doesn't swear. Like
I forgot about that.
It's more wholesome than the idea of Nicolas Cage as Superman. In fact, it really reinforces the idea that Nicolas Cage would be a great Superman. It's incredible. It's basically a movie about generosity.
This movie is really challenging, and it's also really refreshing.
Yeah.
And I do want to explore
and old.
that. That's another story for another thing. But you know, I feel we were talking about this while we were watching it, and I feel like I've seen enough like police films with police procedurals in it, where you have like every cop has got to be dirty.
Sure.
And with the exception of this year's Spiral from the Book of Saul, I feel like you don't really get those
good?
like.
I wanted to see that.
I saw it twice.
Nice.
Really loved it. Cool. It sits at number 9 on my
movies of the year.
But I digress. This is kind of the first film that I've seen, and I don't even know how long, where you have a cop that is not just like legitimately an upstanding service of the law and breaks down a lot of those like Hollywood stereotypes of what cops are.
Yeah.
But also at the same time that he is, as Yvonne says in here, a legitimately upstanding guy. Like he's a decent human being.
Yeah, if he was all of a sudden not a cop, it wouldn't change anything. You know, it's not like, oh yeah, like I'm a cop, so I need to do the right thing. Yeah, it really is not. It has nothing to do with the badge at all.
Yeah, and one of the ways that they explore this very early on is they. So the deal is basically Nick Cage and his character's name, and this is Charlie. Charlie goes in, and his partner Bo. They go in to have coffee. They get a call, and he goes to pay. So he has to go pay.
Sure.
Doesn't have enough for the tip. And she's like having this like really bad day. She's like, oh, whatever. And so he makes
this
this.
What's her
Yvonne.
name? Yeah, Yvonne. Yeah.
So he makes a deal that if he wins the lottery, he'll split half his winnings with her. She thinks he's full of crap. So let me ask you.
But it's also like a New York waitress. She's probably used to not getting tips.
Yeah.
You know, things like that. So it's like, whatever.
But like even like from like that standpoint right there, like I am going somewhere with that, but
sure.
Sidetracked.
Sure.
Man, from someone that used to work in the food industry and like worked around people that legitimately relied on tips as their like, I just want to like put a PSA out there real quick. Please tip your waiters, and delivery drivers.
Yes, do it. Especially, this is going to sound weird and specific, especially on Sundays.
Yes. Because their cars and their bills cannot be paid on goodwill.
Yeah. for sure.
And so Nick Cage, basically, they win the lottery, and then what ends up happening is
It's kind of funny.
He's like debating on whether or not to tell him because of his wife. Who is
tell Yvonne
Yvonne that he won, and it's because of his wife. His wife, we'll talk about it in just a few minutes. I think both of us have a few things to say about it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But he's an honest guy, and the dilemma that he's like, do I tell the truth and keep my word and my promise to this complete stranger?
Yeah.
Or do I honor my wedding vows of honoring my wife?
Yeah. Well, he does. You remember that one scene where he's like, they're talking about, we get a bunch of there was a bowling league that all put in for the same numbers as they did, which was kind of funny. And so it was a $64 million lottery, and they ended up splitting it like
16 ways.
16 ways, yeah. So they got $4 million, and he does come clean to his wife and is like, "Hey, I gave my word to this waitress about this, this lottery ticket." And she's all upset about it. So what ends up happening, like, next scene is the next day, and he goes to honor his word because he's just he's that great of a guy. And he goes and he's like, all right, I'm going to give you a choice. I can either just go ahead and tip you, or you can have half my lottery earnings. And she was like, thinks he's full of crap. She's like, you know what? I'll humor you. Whatever. I take option number 2. Like she's not used to getting tipped, that kind of thing. And that's where the movie goes crazy.
Yeah, the movie starts to kind of develop, but let's kind of like back up and talk about like his marriage to Muriel, and like she's not even on screen yet, and our very first impression of Muriel is Nicolas Cage, who's a Queens native, walking the beat while on duty, and he passes by her hair salon where she works. And the kid that he's talking to is like, oh, hey, aren't you going to go stop in and see your wife? And he's like, no, like, my wife doesn't like to when I stop in. Which right there, like, you just kind of see, like...
Their differences.
And kind of, like, how they process and really, like, where they view the marriage at. Mm-hmm. And when we finally do get her on screen, she's just complaining about, like, his decency and his generosity.
Yeah, basically, like, he makes cop wages. She's discussing with a friend, it's like, you have, like... kind of shady cops for husbands and they never come home, or you have upstanding ones and you don't pay the bills, and that's kind of like how they're criticizing Charlie's character.
Yeah, like right off the bat, like they set her character and her arc up really well. Like even when he's like,
they do.
Even when Charlie is trying to like bring comfort to Muriel about the this deal that he's made with Yvonne, he spins it to where it's focusing on her. It's breeding her ego.
Yeah, which is like it develops her character very, very well as kind of an antagonist, if we're being really blunt. But it's also just like develops his character that, like, you know what, he wants to honor his word and his wife. It's just, it's so good.
But yeah, she basically Rosie Perez in this movie is 5 years removed from her big screen debut in Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing. And like now she's popped up in so many things from
Spike Lee gets like name dropped in this movie too.
Does he? Did I miss that?
Yep. Yeah, you did. So Bo, his like cop, like, his again, it's weirdly a buddy cop movie. His partner mentions they were talking about Knicks tickets and the idea of sitting on the floor, and he's like, "Yeah, you sit on the floor next to Spike Lee and Jack Nicholson."
Which is weird because I always remember Jack Nicholson growing up being a Lakers fan.
Well, beggars can't be choosers.
Maybe not in 1994, I guess.
Sure, yeah.
But yeah, Rosie Perez in this does a really, really fantastic job.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of just being like, just making the audience really despise her as a character.
Yep. Yeah, and it really it would be sad if it would be sad if it didn't go to show just how good natured of a character and a person Charlie is as a person, as a husband. Like it's almost sad. It's almost like, man, I hate seeing him with this frustrating lady. But it builds so well, and again, it just makes you appreciate him and the narrative. It's so natural.
Well, let's talk about their marriage dynamic. Do you ever feel like that's kind of either the way that it is in real life, or at least the way that we see it portrayed in Hollywood, where you kind of have that archetype where you're gonna have one character that's really good and like honest and just, as we've been saying this whole podcast, really wholesome. Mm-hmm. And then on the flip side, you have just kind of that really arrogant, selfish person that kind of doesn't really care about anyone else except for themselves.
I think it's a common archetype in movie depictions. But at the same time, I don't think it's so common that I think it's common dependent upon like genre. Like in a movie like this, where it's like, oh yeah, there's a frustrated relationship, and that relationship is probably gonna develop in a frustrated way, then I think that that's the way that you'll kind of see a movie. But at the same time, you see Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and you have movies like that where it's like, I don't know, that a lot of husbands and wives I think are portrayed as, and I think this is realistic, as honestly kind of really similar. So I don't know. I think there's two ways to spin it. In real life, I don't see this a whole lot. You might have a husband or a wife that's more blunt than the other, but that would be the most extreme thing that I see on.
I think to your point, I think a lot of maybe those disagreements or that archetype that we see unfold with Charlie and Muriel in this film happen a lot of times behind closed doors.
Yeah.
That if it happens, this is a very tamed version, because typically when you have marriages that are like this, there is one partner in it that's going to be more verbally or even physically abusive.
Yeah, which you didn't really get in this.
No.
You just have a stark difference.
Yeah, and I think that, differences aside, it's still a bad place. And I mentioned this while we were watching it, always kind of seems like the good guy or the guy that you're rooting for, 9 times out of 10 in these kinds of movies, always kind of has the bad relationship that you don't want them necessarily to be in, and you're rooting for them to kind of end up with another character, which ends up happening.
Or honestly, just to kind of play the other part equal time, you have your Pam Beesleys versus your Roy Andersons, where you have the straight-laced female character and the guy that you don't want her to be with, but whatever. I love to your in this same dialogue, I love how he explains that they met each other in high school. She was his first and obviously only time, and that was just that. I think it really explains. It's a really simple way to explain a lot, because you just have this great upstanding guy who, just is dedicated and honors his word and does the right thing and follows through every time. So he married his high school sweetheart, his first lover, because that's just in his nature and his character to do, despite the fact that they have their obvious differences. Their characters do not mesh when it comes to morals and livelihood, things like that.
No, and it's like it's very weird to even see them. Like, there's a few scenes where they're like standing like by one another.
Yeah.
And it's like from a like even just like a visual standpoint, it's, and I mentioned this when they first introduced Rosie Perez, I was like, what a weird like partnership.
Yeah.
And sometimes like the chemistry between like actors can like overcome kind of like, I wouldn't necessarily put these two actors together.
Yeah.
But I just never felt like, even through the hostility, they never truly felt like a couple on the rocks to me.
Yeah.
I don't know if you felt that way, but to me, it felt forced.
When it came to the rocks, as we're saying, when it came to a head, it was very sudden. It felt like, I don't know that I would use the word forced. I feel like the narrative lays it out really well. But I do feel like when everything really comes to a head, and we're getting into spoiler territory here, but when things really come to a head and she's like, I want a divorce, it's just like, it makes sense, but there's not like, there's some friction, but there's not like, you don't see fights and stuff. And I feel like we're used to, as movie viewers, seeing like a little bit more stress than we got.
I guess I want to clarify. I'm not necessarily meaning like the divorce scene in particular, but just their dynamic throughout everything. Like, it just, for me, like, they just did not have chemistry.
Yeah.
And it just did not flow well. And that's kind of what I'm referring to. So it kind of felt like all of the chemistry that he had, it was with Bridget Fonda's character, which I guess could have been like, this is how intentional.
That's kind of how I feel about it. It's just like, I think the narrative is strong enough to assume that like that's the way that they wanted you to feel in this, from these portrayals.
But all of this stuff, like all the stuff that she feels towards Charlie, is
talking about Rosie Perez's character.
Yeah, everything that she feels, this is all prior to the winnings. The fact that they've actually won it.
The fact that like she wants to move out of Queens, he doesn't.
Yeah.
He wants a family, she doesn't seem to. Things like that.
And last year when we interviewed Rick Soderbergh, one of the things who's a relationship coach, victimsandvillains.net, or wherever you guys get your podcast from, highly recommend it. The episode is titled Relationships and Mental Health, but he had talked about how like some of the best reason, or some of the reasons why we see such a high divorce rates sometimes actually come from the fact that you have a lack of communication or differences or whatever in your marriage that is the reason why.
Yeah.
And
so it starts in those more formative
it
scenes,
starts,
if you will.
But 90% of like fights and stuff that we see or experience in marriage happens because of money. And when you introduce that $4 million and then take it away and make it $2 million, you're starting to introduce new currents into the already hurricane that you're feeling as a marriage.
That makes sense. So you're kind of saying that like, because money is a pretty common catalyst for marital friction, that the narrative kind of like uses that to introduce that friction or substantiate the friction.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's even a scene where she is like stupid bitter about how Charlie is handling the winnings. I mean, some of the things that we see throughout the film is Charlie takes a bullet, and in taking that bullet, he gets this big press conference that's named after him, and he gives $10,000 to the police widows funds.
I like that scene. That fund seems so random. Did you feel that way?
No.
Really?
No.
Okay, continue.
But like, just her look was like, just that's $10,000.
Like, you betrayed me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when she reacts to the fact that he's promised half his winnings to Yvonne, she freaks out as well. And then the Knicks tickets for Bo.
Yeah.
One of the most best scenes in here. Like,
oh yeah.
His reaction was so good. So good. But also too the scene where like all the newspaper clippings get like kind of like record his stuff, but basically like he had him and Yvonne had basically teamed up and paid for everyone's bus fare for an entire evening.
Yep.
And it made the news, and it's like, okay, man, like that's really wholesome, but like it upset her.
Yeah.
And
that one I think is a little bit like I understood that one a bit more, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like she's like again like introducing that like money is like it has a tendency to really tear people apart if they're not already on the same page.
I'm so glad you added that, like, if they're not already in the same page thing, because like you kind of see all questionable fidelity aside, you kind of see that Yvonne and Charlie, although not being a couple, just being friends and, you know, kind of united from this circumstance, you already see that like they are on the same page. Yeah, and so it's interesting, like, yeah, I think that you're right. Obviously, you're right. Statistically, you're right that like a lot of marital friction comes from money. But I think that really, realistically speaking, a lot of marital friction before money comes from not being on the same page.
Yeah, lack of communication is one of the things that too is. I've been married for 7 years now, and one of the things that when we went through premarital counseling, we were talking about is. We did one session with the pastor's wife. Sure. And I was like, all right, like, just be real with me. Like, what's the secret to a lasting good marriage? And that was the first thing I said. Just be open and honest with each other.
Yeah. All
the way.
Yeah.
And, you know, explain your intentions for every action you take. Because at the end of the day, like, that's the person that you are going to be seeing more than anybody else.
Yep.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
Yeah. And I think that, like, to kind of play devil's advocate here for Rosie Perez's character, the wife, I do think that, like, initially Charlie starts off on really good grounds as far as, you know, he communicated, like, hey, I made this promise to this waitress about the ticket, blah, blah, blah. But then after that, like, pretty much never, ever consults her at all. And it's like, on one hand, I have to kind of be like, well, like a lot of people, traditional like house structure is like, well, yeah, the husband like is the head of the household, and so he like makes final decisions for certain things, monetary or otherwise. You have like that very traditional view, and so like I think that's a fair perspective to take as far as being in favor of Charlie goes. But I also think that like, yeah, the fact that he just kind of stops communicating, is really like, to just kind of play devil's advocate, that is a lot of where friction like begins, aside from the fact that they're just different people,
Yeah, and it goes back to that, I guess, we can kind of get into a little bit of like Charlie's character and kind of like how he operates, and
yeah,
kind of specifically like how we operate. And it goes to I don't remember which book it's in, but Paul in the New Testament writes about how, just because everything is acceptable doesn't mean it's permissible.
Sure.
And there are moments in this movie with Charlie that you go on and you experience that, just because you can doesn't necessarily mean that you should.
Yeah, that's very true.
And
even if what you're doing, the can aspect, even if it isn't wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and that's one of the things that, there are definitely, like, as a husband watching this movie, there are definitely times where it never feels like he's married. Like, he kind of acts like a bachelor sometimes.
He does. But, again, to kind of, like, play defense here, I think he's kind of treated like a bachelor sometimes.
Yeah, that's kind of, I guess, like, that's where the narrative really kind of started to get under my skin.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, cool. Like, I can understand, like, him having, a wife and everything. But she felt like such a secondary character.
But again, I think that she was supposed to. It's a rom-com. Let's be honest.
It is, but it's like, it's not a straight up rom-com.
It's not. But it's like a buddy cop rom-com. I don't know. It's odd. Like, but I definitely get what you're saying. It's like, maybe the wife, as the wife, got an unfair amount of screen time. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. To the point of, like, she just kind of felt like really like one-dimensional, kind of. Like, they tried to make her seem as just, like, shallow as possible.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it worked.
It worked. But it is it's definitely the sore spot of the development in this movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. For sure.
But, yeah, so Charlie's a really, really wholesome guy. I mean, I talked about, this kind of being a little bit, like, challenging.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously for two guys of faith, like, this is kind of something
married guys. Yeah.
Two married guys of faith.
Yeah.
This definitely is something that I'm kind of like, man, like, I feel like I watch movies like this and I'm just like, I'm not doing enough.
Oh, yeah.
Like I felt kind of convicted watching this movie, but I'm like, man,
yeah.
like, I'm like all like pumped and like encouraged at the same time.
Yeah, like, it's weird. It's just like, oh, I am aptly humbled. Like, I could be doing better, but I feel, thank you, Nicolas-Cage, you have encouraged me to do the right thing again.
This is why we podcast about Nicolas Cage.
Yeah. So we should probably talk a little bit more about, like, Act 2, Act 3 kind of spoilery kind of stuff, because the movie, like, once the ball drops and then gets rolling, like, it's pretty good. It gets pretty wild. Like,
yeah. So where's the kind of the first thing you want to talk about as far as, like, the second act?
Okay, so I think, like,
because we've kind of touched on, like, some of the things
that
happen.
I think the boat.
Yeah,
the boat is really where it is probably the most pivotal movie in the scene. Pivotal scene in the movie.
Words.
Yeah, words are hard.
Yeah, so it's interesting that, because for me, it kind of like that scene particularly like spoiled how Muriel's scene was gonna end. Like the moment that like she was interacting with that other guy, like I was like, they're gonna get divorced. She's gonna marry him. He may or may not stay.
Sure.
But the boat is kind of like basically like it's these like lottery winnings or like people. They don't ever
It's kind of the bourgeoisie.
Yeah, they don't really explain like what's going on here. But both Muriel and Charlie and Yvonne all get invited out here, and basically Charlie ends up missing the boat to help Yvonne. And they kind of have this like romantic like get to know me exchange.
Yeah.
And like you said, like this is the pivotal scene. Like this is the scene where they're no longer the cop and the waitress.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. All the kind of archetypes kind of get like let off there. So it's a wonderful scene. It's a beautiful scene. It's one of those things just like as a fan of the rom part of romantic comedies, it's so satisfying, but it also like, at least for me personally, it's where I started to like get a little bit frustrated, just a little bit with like Charlie's character, because it's like I really want to see this guy do the right thing, and you never actually see him do the wrong thing. But so they go out and they have dinner, they have champagne, they dance one time. They just talk about each other's lives. This is when you get the dialogue about like how he and Muriel were like high school sweethearts and things like that. And then toward the end of it, during the middle of it, you're getting cutscenes to the boat, and Muriel is just having the time of her life for what she wants. With this older rich guy who, quote unquote, wants to help them with their finances or whatever, help them be established in their wealth. So toward the end of it, Charlie is kind of mumbling to himself, like he's like reciting, like, "Hey, craziest thing happened." Basically, he's trying to like figure out a way to explain to Muriel why he wasn't on the boat. And so he gets to the table where she is after the boat like redocks, and he's like, "Craziest thing," and she goes, "Yeah, it was veal." And he's like, yeah, it was veal, yeah, like just like plays it up and it's really great because I love that scene because it allows Charlie to continue to be the upstanding character that he is, but it also really characterizes her as like she cares much more about this lifestyle than she cares about being attentive to her husband.
Yeah, it really demonstrates how shallow her character is.
Yeah.
Kind of where her priorities are.
Yep.
But also at the same time, the Charlie and Yvonne dynamic really starts to, again, like, kind of take course. And, like, you're right. Like, you never once ever see Charlie ever do anything wrong.
No, he never crosses the line.
Never crosses the line. Like, he's upstanding the entire time, very respectful.
Yeah.
And I think we as a movie-going audience, we're almost trained to expect they're going to go home together.
Right.
It's a kiss.
They're going to,
and
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that, I think also, too, with movies like this is, like, they're typically rated PG-13. This is a family movie.
Yep.
Rated PG.
Yep.
And it's not something that you are expect because it feels like, you could put this right next to, like, other rom-coms, like Definitely Maybe, or, like...
My Big Fat Greek Wedding.
My Big Fat Greek Wedding, yeah. And it stacks up perfectly.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, Charlie he's just that upstanding citizen guy, and Yvonne is as well.
Yeah. Really. Yeah.
Really, well.
She ends up, like, she's married to this guy. He's a piece of trash. She ends up with $12,000 worth of his credit card debt. Kind of building a, like, opposing situation to Charlie and his wife, which is kind of interesting. She's just trying to, like, she's just blue collar, just like he is.
That's another thing that I just like thought of that, like, the movie, like, bothers me about this movie is that.
Oh my gosh, you always do this.
Why did they never establish that she was like separated from her husband? Because like
they did. That's the first scene.
Legally, well, maybe I missed it. Like, but
she's in court in the first scene.
She said that they're still married.
They're still married, but they are separated. He wasn't living with her. He was out of town. He was an actor. Remember?
I do remember that. I just never remember them actually establishing.
They never use the word separated, if that's what you're like.
That's what I'm coming at.
Okay.
Because anytime they bring up her marriage, it's always, yes, technically yes, but...
They want to establish legal technicalities because a lot of the movie builds to a court case.
Yeah.
That's why. That's why they don't use the term separated.
Yeah, I mean, so technically speaking, like, she's not as upstanding as I previously stated. Just throwing that out there. She's still married.
She's separated.
They never say that. They never establish that.
But they established that he doesn't live with her.
They did.
They established that she wants nothing to do with him, and that he only comes back into her life because she becomes a millionaire. All that is established. I mean, sure, there has to be some conjecture there, but like, they clearly also established the same thing, kind of in equal tones, with Muriel. Well, like, I want a divorce. He moves in with a friend, like his cop buddy, and boom, that's separation without saying it. I just think they really don't use the word separated because they wanted to establish like the legal binding aspects of marriage for the purpose of setting up the court case scene. Thanks
for letting me use your Barney blanket.
What?
Yeah. So he says that to Bo's daughter.
Oh yeah. That was so funny.
But yeah, no, she like there's definitely, because you know when we see her throughout the first act, like you know she has all that debt that she's acquired, has to file for bankruptcy,
right?
Has a toxic work environment.
Yeah, true.
And
but is a good worker.
Is a great worker. Mm-hmm. And we just talked about toxic workplace not that long ago in another episode.
Yeah.
Caveat, not that long ago. But this movie does a really good job at kind of like really setting up everything that she's kind of gone through and like all the uphill battles that she's constantly having to fight.
Yeah.
And so by the time that they have this boat dock scene, it eventually is kind of like a big break for her. More so, I would argue, than the money, because there's a difference in, I feel like, you know, it's one thing to have money to kind of, you know, take away your problems, but again, that money is going to go. It's not always going to be around forever. Whereas having someone in your corner, be it a friend or a husband or a wife or significant other, that to your mental health is going to be better in the long haul.
Yeah, and they show her mom in like one scene, but her mom is like, you can tell that her mom and her have differing personalities just by that little clip. Yeah, so yeah, I think that's a great point. For sure.
But kudos to her, because she took her lottery winnings and bought that toxic work environment and made her own coffee diner, and also dedicated a little corner of it to Charlie to feed the homeless.
Oh my gosh. So wholesome. Incredibly wholesome. Yeah. The movie is not without its imperfections. I think I want to bring this because I feel like you've kind of tried to like figure out some of the things that you didn't like, but there are a couple things that I wanted to point out. So a lot of the movie kind of culminates in that one part of the movie, all right, it's like 3/4 of the way through, it's like beginning of the third act, where like the movie just becomes bad, you know? Every single movie, you know, like I don't care. Like,
are you talking about the courtroom scene? Because I'm
talking about the courtroom scene. I'm talking about when freaking Woody is over at Sid's house. I'm talking about all those scenes, okay, where the movie just becomes sad for like 25 minutes.
Just some listener clarification. Micah, we've talked about this several times off air. Micah does not like to feel sad during movies
ever.
Continue.
Yeah. Although, that being said, The Pianist is a beautiful movie. But anyway, So during this scene, like, it all like culminates where there's this big thing where in the divorce settlement, Muriel, yeah, Courage Cowardly Dog. Muriel she's claiming that because the lottery ticket was, quote, hers, that she should get back and be paid back the other half of it that her husband, quote, without her permission, gave to this, quote, stranger. A lot of quotes in there, but I mean, it becomes a courtroom scene. It's all like he said, she said anyway. Yeah, so that becomes this thing, and it's this whole drawn out thing where like the good guy is made to look like the bad guy, and everybody kind of like takes pity, I guess, on the fact that like this is a woman filing for divorce, and I don't know how to say this, but we felt like it was very typified.
Yeah, it takes the entire movie's pacing and just completely slows it down, brings it to a halt.
It does, yeah.
And I'm just like sitting here like looking at this film, and I'm like, why do I feel like so bored all of a sudden? But you need that for the ending to really be satisfied.
You do.
Because when the jury says, well, we find in favor of the plaintiff, which is who is Muriel, she ends up basically like flat broke by the end of the movie, living in her mom's house in the Bronx and working in a nail salon.
Yeah, which is just a great turn of events. The movie has sort of I don't know if I'd call it, you might call it a plot twist toward the end, but anyway, like, so they build up this whole thing, and the plaintiff wins. So Muriel basically has to be paid back all the money that was allegedly hers. Big court scene. Obviously, it was the jury's decision after all the evidence and everybody's testimonies. And so what happens is Yvonne, she runs away, like literally just disappears for like 2 days. She just runs away. And that's where like the movie really develops into the like romantic aspect of it, where like, I'll let Josh talk about that. But my problem with this is that like, you already see Yvonne having spent at least some of the money. I mean, probably not a full $2 million, but like she bought the diner, and like you see her like after coming home from shopping, and you assume it's interesting. She doesn't get a divorce. She doesn't pay that money for some reason, but she does. You assume anyway that she pays off the credit card debt. But my problem is they never really explain how she was able to pay back the $2 million in whole. Like, how is that a thing? Not only that, but there's this one huge thing in the movie that we haven't talked about and that's the narrator.
I was gonna get ready to get into him.
Yeah.
To your point though about how like she pays it, I think a part of it is as they're getting ready to leave in the end of it, before they get all of the letters. We'll get into that in just a few minutes.
Yep.
But she basically either sells or like leases out the diner.
That makes sense.
Because there's kind of like a leasing sign. At least that's what I interpreted it as. It looks like one of those like official bank things. So
that makes sense.
That would be my guess.
Yeah. I don't know. It's just one of those things. Just like, I don't know. Somebody gets $2 million. They buy a restaurant. They pay off $12,000 in debt. That's, a percentage of $2 million for sure. Yeah,
this movie, like during that courtroom scene, also acts like the acts of charity that we've seen and have established who these characters are. It takes money to pay for Nick's tickets and people's subway fares and the $10,000 to the police widows fund and all of that stuff. Like, so theoretically, like, Charlie also should not have $2 million or at least $1 million by the end of this because of what he did. And we didn't even talk about this. He rents out an entire ball field, professional stadium, so he can play with the neighborhood kids.
Yeah, which is beautiful, but not cheap.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's like, how much you really think are going to be here? And like, he's a cop. Like, we do not take care of our cops. It's one of the things that are a huge problem in our society.
Sure.
But on a cop salary and an honest cop salary, let me clarify that too.
Yeah, for sure.
How long do you think it's going to take him to pay you back $1 million?
Right. Yeah, but I don't know. I think she's claiming that like, oh, well, the money that he spent on his own volition while we were married is like, I can't get my hands on that. But this $2 million to this other lady that I didn't know about, which is just not true, that I want back. It seems, but honestly, it really feels like a jab. It really feels like revenge, which is just fine. Honestly, as far as the progression of the story goes, if that's what it is, that's okay. Like, I'm satisfied with that as a viewer.
Well, let's jump into Mr. Angel Dupree, who is our narrator.
Yeah, weird.
It's so strange that this movie opens up on him narrating everything.
Yeah, and then he like walks by and you see him in certain scenes. Like there's a court scene that he's like in and he's like watching.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
And then he shows up like right after they've made up and kind of like Charlie's found Yvonne, and he's like I'm hungry, and then it's revealed that he's a New York Times undercover journalist.
Yeah.
And how did you feel about that?
That's fine, okay? I think it's really cool, but the fact that he was there at the beginning, before the lottery ticket, is weird. But I have a theory.
Lay it on me.
Okay. This theory is basically founded on one like phrase. There's a courtroom scene when they are questioning Yvonne. And they pointed out that, like, you filed for bankruptcy on the same day that you, quote, met Charlie, and he promised you half of his earnings, which doesn't make sense because there's no way he would have known that day that he would win. So the plaintiff winning was stupid, but obviously it sets up for the end of the movie. So they're trying to point out, they're trying to like make this accusation that like, oh yeah, you were in on it from the beginning, like whatever. And they were like, what do you call that? What do you call that you filed for bankruptcy and then this guy promises you this? And she was like, fate. And that is kind of where my theory comes in, because I think that like there's no like God figure in this movie. This isn't Evan Almighty or something. So like it doesn't seem to be like a faith-based perspective at all. But I think that the narrator is supposed to represent the hand of fate.
That's not where I thought you were going with that.
I want to know where you thought I was going.
So his name's Angel, for one.
Okay.
I honestly thought you were like, kind of like the way that when you look at a movie like It's a Wonderful Life, the way that George gets like depressed, and throughout the entire movie you kind of see like these like stars talking, and then an angel is sent to Earth to get his wings so that he can like walk George through life, what life would be like if he hadn't been born.
Sure.
And I kind of almost like feel like there's like that supernatural bend to it.
Sure.
Because like you had said, like to point out your theory, like, all of these coincidences and fate happen. And like, I'm not going to say like, like fate, believe what you're going to believe,
Right.
But, I think that there are moments where people are in the right place at the right time.
Right. Which would otherwise be described as fate. Them going to the same hotel the same night after he hadn't seen Yvonne for 2 days. She happened to be there on the boat, or at the boat, but not on the boat, and he sees her, and they have this night, like things like that.
Yeah, and it also, like, with the journalist angle, it also explains, like, how, like, the New York Times always had, the New York Post always had, updates. Articles and updates throughout the course.
Yep.
Which I was questioning that throughout the whole movie. It's like, two things. Like, does the New York Post really not have anything to cover except for, like, this, like, quote, scandal that's not really a scandal at all?
Sure.
And two, like, how are they finding out all this information so quickly?
Fast? Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you're simply suggesting that, like, oh, this guy's an angel?
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, that's fine. That's fine. Like, I think I was trying to steer away from the faith angle because, like, it's not like they ever brought God up or anything like that.
I mean, that's why I brought up It's a Wonderful Life, because, like, when you look at that movie, like,
they never bring up God.
They never bring up God, but
right.
they do talk about angels.
Yeah.
And it's not from a faith-based perspective; it's more from that supernatural perspective.
That's true. Yeah, that's fair.
And that's kind of what I'm alluding to.
Well, okay. So, given that we're talking about this and that you brought up the Apostle Paul earlier and stuff like this, I'd like to bring up actually some, like, faith-based perspectives.
Okay.
In this movie. I think that, like, probably the biggest thing that going back to the angel character, the photographer, I love, there's that verse that's like, it's like, be kind to everyone you meet, for some have entertained angels unaware. And it's just like, that's so cool. And it goes with such this, like, biblical narrative of, like, taking care of the poor and things like that, which is very much in, like, Charlie's nature to do. You see him, like, putting cash in like a bum's can and stuff like that. So that's just really, really cool. And then, but probably the best thing is, I guess what's known as the law of reciprocity. Given it shall be given unto you. Yeah.
We kind of see that at the end where
everything
has been taken from them, and they go into Yvonne's diner and basically are just, they say it took them 3 days to open up all the mail from people that had just given to them.
Yeah.
And they had a total of $600,000 by the end of the year, or by the end of that 3 days.
Just 3 days.
And
that's just 3 days. I mean, who knows if people had continued to send.
Yeah, generosity, returning generosity with generosity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just love that. I just wanted to point that out. I thought that was, like, a really common narrative just throughout this entire movie. That, like, this cop is treated insanely well. His wife, who doesn't treat anybody well but herself, is treated very poorly. And it's just, like, this, like, sowing and reaping theme that I think is just, we keep using the word wholesome, and it's definitely that, but I think it's a theme. I think it's, like, a genuine theme of this movie.
Yeah. And one of the last things I wanted to talk about was to go back to Charlie and Muriel's dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
The fight where she says, I want a divorce. He says that I'm not going to change for you. I'm not going to change Muriel. Like that's what he wants. Like, that's what she wants. Bottom line is, like, she wants a change. Not just in her life, but also in her husband. Like, she wants someone that is on par with where she is in her life.
Yeah, and nobody can blame her for that, but she's not exactly a wholesome person.
Let me ask you this. Like,
sure.
would you ever change, or have you ever changed your personality for a significant other?
No, never.
Man, I did a lot of dumb things when I was, like, before I met my wife. I was a Nickelback fan for a couple months.
Nice.
Simply to impress the girl that I was dating.
Yeah.
I mean, I did a lot of, like, dumb things.
Sure.
And it took its toll on me. Like there was after years of just, like, metamorphosizing myself.
Sure.
I eventually like it took its toll on my mental health, and I eventually like stopped dating at one point to kind of like I need to figure out who I am.
Yeah.
Because like right now, like there are fragments of me that are like left over from like this girl or that girl, and I just don't know who I am right now.
Sure.
And so when you end up losing yourself to other people's expectations, you end up losing a part of yourself in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. You end up kind of like, I'm going to use this phrase, it's kind of interesting, but you end up misidentifying yourself for someone else's expectation of you.
Yeah.
Basically.
And I want to say something, but I want to put a disclaimer on this first.
Okay.
So this is June. This is Pride Month. And we are two cisgender heterosexual men.
Yep.
I have a lot of friends that are in the LGBT community.
Yeah, I have a handful.
And I've asked them several times about their kind of journey of, especially transgender friends. I've asked them, like, what's it been like for you to kind of come to the realization that you don't feel comfortable in the gender that you were born into?
Sure.
And they kind of feel like that identity is what they're describing, the way that, like, I kind of felt like mismatched and stuff like that.
Sure.
And, I just want to say to any LGBT listeners that might be hearing this right now, if you ever need to talk, please reach out to us. I don't know why, I felt like I was supposed to say that.
Yeah, dude. Yeah.
Because I know that out of every group that, in our demographic, that I feel like those are individuals that need to hear, that more than anything.
Yeah.
Is that A, identity is important, and B, that you are beautiful and loved in the state that you're in right now, regardless of wherever you are in that process of discovery.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. I want to, you asked me that very pointed question about, did you ever change for a significant other? And I really am confident when I say no. However,
can I jump in here real quick just to go back to the LGBT?
So sorry, didn't mean to.
No, you're good. I just want to jump off of what you were just talking about. Just be true to yourself and don't change.
Right.
I think it's the bottom line of what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I digress.
Well, no, yeah, I want to say that wasn't always easy. It was not always easy to make the conscious decision to just be myself. I've always gotten a lot of flack for being weird or being emotional or even being dare I say girly, or I had long hair for years and I have toothpick legs and I wear really tight clothes and whatever stuff like that. Did you just look me up and down?
No, I was gonna say, says the guy. Girl,
yeah,
I'm the one with the nail polish.
The nail polish on. Oh, I got my nails done for my wedding.
I do mine every week.
Anyway, I want to say that as much as I enjoyed being exactly who I am, it meant that when I did need to change because I genuinely had character flaws, that got hard. When I genuinely had to realize that I didn't always love myself or treat myself well or talk about myself well, that was a really hard pill to swallow because I had spent so long just in confidence, just enjoying the way that I am and not changing, not even for the better, that when I needed to, or when I was faced with the realization that despite all that is true, I didn't in fact love myself, those were hard. Those were hard pills to swallow. And so I want to bring that up because I don't want to seem like this douchey guy who just stubborn and never changed for any girl. No, I am proud of that, yeah, but that didn't mean there wasn't some kind of journey when it came to like learning about myself and learning about like maybe why some of the reasons I didn't want to change were actually not as confident or wholesome as I had wanted them to be when I was that way. Because realistically, like being a married person, I'm not going to say that I am a different person than I used to be, but I am saying that like, and I'm not going to, and I'm not also not saying that I like squelch myself or my personality for my wife. But at the same time, there are definitely times, days, situations in which that I need to humble myself and be like, all right, I want a certain thing. I want to act a certain way. She's not on the same page, and I'm going to honor that. And that doesn't make me a different person.
I think when you're talking in relationship terms, there's a difference between change and growth.
For sure.
And
although growth doesn't come without change.
It doesn't. But they're also engineered by two completely different motives.
Yeah.
So like for me, like I've shared this before. When Eric and I first started dating, there were things that in my life that like she's like, I don't exactly think that's a mentally healthy place for you to be in.
Yeah.
And so that meant sacrificing things that I hold dear, like horror movies.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
I had to step away from horror movies to grow myself in maturity and how I viewed them before actually coming back to them.
That's so valid. Yeah.
And that was definitely something that it was definitely a journey that I had to go through. It wasn't me necessarily changing for my wife, but it was me growing in my own maturity and kind of handling and dealing with things that I had that was my own baggage.
Yeah. All right. My favorite sitcoms maybe being my like favorite, form of film, if you will. My favorite sitcom is Community. There's an episode called Physical Education, and basically in the episode, there's this one macho character who takes a pool, like a billiards class, because he thinks it's macho, and the billiards class, teacher wants him to wear shorts, which he thinks is dumb and makes him uncool, blah, blah, blah. And there's this character named Abed, the best character in the show. And Abed goes, when you really know who you are and what you like about yourself, changing for others isn't such a big deal. And Jeff, who's the other guy, he just goes, Abed, you're a god. And while I don't think what Abed said is like 100% like the stone cold truth, because I do think that there are dangers in changing yourself for other people, I think that line is like is genuinely really, really inspiring. And I think that that's really important, and it's kind of like alludes more toward probably the idea of growth than mere change. But it's just like, yeah, when you know who you are, you like who you are, then when you find yourself in situations where you need to be humble for someone else, that is much more easy and an acceptable thing to do, because as important as it is to love yourself and to treat yourself well, it's also really important not to think highly of yourself and to think of yourself first, So yeah, I just think there's a lot of value in that, and I wanted to say it.
No, it's good, man. Yeah, I just want to encourage everyone listening before we kind of go into the final portion of the show, just to, be comfortable with who you are.
Yeah.
And, that's just the bottom line note. Like, at the end of the day, like, you have to live with you.
Yeah.
And, it's going to be much better for your own mental health if you're just true to who you are.
Yeah.
Don't change for anybody. I think sometimes it's especially hard in the social media age to not look at something like TikTok or Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, just the number of other different social media platforms out there, and compare and say, oh man, like why can't I be like this person with 500,000 followers, or
Sure.
just be comfortable. And sometimes a part of that comfort, search for comfort, can bring you, to your point, to some really dangerous and, for lack of a better word, just places that are really tough to deal with.
Yeah, for sure. I really don't have anything to add to that.
All right, well let's put it through the. I think we already know this.
Yeah,
Is It Could Happen to You worthy of high praise?
it is worthy of high praise. It is.
Yeah.
I have a gently off-topic question for you, Josh.
Okay.
I've actually been wanting to ask this for a while, and I just feel like tonight's the night. We've had a really good episode into discussion, I think. So for the listeners who may or may not know, or may or may not see our pictures that we post every time we watch a movie, probably half or so of the past number 10 Nick-Cage movies we've watched has been on VHS tape.
Yeah.
Josh, I want to know, just for you, has that affected your experience at all watching these movies that are, so this movie, we didn't say this, and we also didn't do trivia. This movie is set in 1994.
Yeah.
Obviously tapes, they stopped making tapes in, I want to say it was '06.
Yeah.
Something like that, and they stopped making VCRs 10 years later. So watching early 2000s movies in tape, I think can be a little bit of a shock and a little bit weird, but I think personally, sometimes, depending on era, tape is the right way to watch a movie as far as experiencing its period. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. And I think most of my VHSs actually come from the late 90s, early 2000s.
Sure.
With some exceptions, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Play Misty for me. And Metropolis, which is...
Oh, that's ancient.
Yeah. Really... everything else comes from that era, though. But for me, I think I enjoy watching movies, and I enjoy experiencing the era that they were produced in.
Right.
I would love to be able to, like I said, winning the lottery. I want to be able to have reels that we can watch stuff on.
Absolutely, that'd be gorgeous. Yeah. I think so. I saw on somebody's Instagram, another tape head. They had a tape copy. I'm sure that they probably made it themselves, but they were watching a tape copy of It Part 1, the new It Part 1.
Ooh, that'd be interesting.
And it was just this looks better than the theatrical release. And I think the theater is the best way to view a movie.
Same.
Absolutely. It's the best way to view anything, honestly. But that is a period piece through and through. The first one, specifically, is a movie that is set in, what is it, the 80s, 70s?
80s, yeah. No,
yeah.
It's 87.
87? Yeah. 1987. That, in my opinion, would be the best way to watch that movie. Back to the Future 1, I feel the same about. Not necessarily Back to the Future 2, and not necessarily It Part 2, but think about period pieces and the aesthetic of the tape, and just how reminiscent it is of the period of tapes. And it was just such a satisfying condition and everything. That's imperfect, but fitting.
Micah got me into tapes. If you guys haven't been able to,
sorry, I've just wanted to talk about this for a long time, and I think it's a really cool topic.
man, we should do like a debate episode and get like people that are like exclusively digital, and then you get people that are like, I need 4K or Blu-ray.
Oh, those guys.
I have a couple of friends, and I think we even have a couple of people on staff that are like
Sure.
hardcore. We'll just put that episode out there, see what we get.
Yeah, that could be fun.
This movie is incredibly worthy of high praise, though.
Very. It's like, honestly, if we've stopped doing the Rorschach scale. I want to do one. I do. I want to do one for this movie.
For this movie?
Yeah.
All right. Let me dust it off. I had to borrow it from Victims and Villains. This is like an in-universe thing that's going on. All right, 0 to 5. Where's it land?
It lands like, shoot. I am really up between 4 and 4.5.
That's also, well, I'm gonna land it at a very solid 4 because
it's definitely a solid 4.
Just some of the courtroom scenes like really slow that movie down for me.
Yeah, it slowed the movie. Yeah, for sure, slow the movie down. There are some things like you brought about, like their marriage dynamic and things like that are like they work, but they're not perfect.
Stanley Tucci, though.
Oh my god. Yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to bring it back because this movie is like, since we've been doing That's High Praise, this is my favorite movie that we've done.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, we've done other variations of That's High Praise, but this is definitely the best one that we've done so far.
Yes.
This is definitely one that. So I guess we didn't talk about this, but Mike and I, when we did The Rock, I like the week after found it at a thrift store and bought it.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved it. So like this is now on my list for like movies that like I would like to own on VHS.
Yeah.
Because it's an incredible movie.
Yeah.
From start to finish.
Yeah. It really is. It's wonderful.
So, all right, man. Where can people find you online?
You can find me on Instagram at Mullet Stash, STACHE, like mustache. You can also, I haven't done anything with this account for a while, but I do have an at VHZest Instagram. I was trying to sell comics for a while. I still kind of intend on doing that. I've only shipped a comics like once, and it makes me nervous, but I want to get into it, so please inspire me. And then, because Josh is going to bring up his weird movie account thing, you can find me on Discogs at Damian Wayne if you're into records.
Look, Letterboxd is not a weird thing. Just because you've never heard of it doesn't mean that the millions of cinephiles that listen to movie podcasts like this.
It sounds like a pen pal service.
Letterboxd? Bro, Letterboxd is when you look. Do you know what that term means?
I guess I don't.
So Letterboxd is when you watch like a VHS or like even a DVD.
Is it 3x4?
In the 3:4 ratio.
Okay.
Those boxes on the side, they're called letterboxed.
Why?
I don't know.
It's just the opposite of widescreen, like the widescreen black area.
Like they're the black bars that are horizontal. I don't remember what those that has a technical term too. I don't remember what it's called.
Cool. Yeah, annoying is what I would call them.
Anyways, you guys can find me on Letterboxd and Instagram at Captain Nostalgia, and follow Victims and Villains. Every movie that we cover on here is handpicked by our patrons at our $5 tier. This is a Victims and Villains production. Victims and Villains is a nonprofit that educates and engages individuals on mental health awareness and suicide prevention through pop culture. So if you or someone you know is listening to this right now, we do encourage you guys to reach out to us on any of our social media. Just search Victims and Villains or go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. You can also find links to that in the descriptions below. But if you go to victimsandvillains.net, you guys will be able to get access to past episodes of That's High Praise, our flagship podcast, Victims and Villains, and most importantly, our mental health resource library, all of which you guys can find information for below, wherever you guys are currently streaming this episode. And hope you guys have a good day. And remember that Nicolas Cage is the only actor worthy of high praise. Woo!